horn and cloven hoof, later adopted by the church to depict the devil, was a symbol of good, and the horned god was the very first incarnation of Santa Claus. The killing and eating of a sacred animal or plant was not an offering to a god to gain his favor, but a sacrament, like the eating of the body and drinking of the blood of Christ at Mass. And through contact with the divine life present in the animal or plant, one was blessed. Although the actual eating and drinking of the flesh and blood was the most perfect contact, blessings were also to be had through external contact, when you were merely sprinkled with the blood, wore the hides, heads, or horns of sacrificed beasts, or brought sacred sprigs and boughs into your home. Then, one day, strange giants over 6 feet tall, bringing iron and agriculture, entered the world of the little people, and most of them scattered. But some of their shaman mixed with the newcomers and became highly respected for their knowledge of herbs, as midwives and healers. Known as witches, they were also feared and hired for their knowledge of herbal poisons. And up until the 16th century, every large British household had one of these witches on its staff. But when the Catholic Church initiated the Great Witch Hunt, the remaining little people were forced to retreat, first to the heart of the ancient forests, then to marshes and inaccessible mountain areas, until, eventually, they faded into the mists of time, partly destroyed and partly absorbed by their conquerors. Expert archers and woodsmen, dressed in their forest green clothes, they blended into the forest, appearing and disappearing at a moment's notice. All this instilled a superstitious fear in their overlords that the little people were endowed with supernatural powers. At first, the little people were vindictive. They caused sickness, ruined crops, buildings caught fire, animals died, and children were stolen from their cots. Eventually, the farmers pacified them by putting out food for them. Their tools were made of wood, so few traces of their existence remain. Only tiny stone-tipped arrows or elf darts, and hundreds of myths and legends. In Britain, they were known as elves, fairies, and goblins. In Norway, as the Nisser, and in Sweden, the Tomtar. Now, throughout most of the world, the little people have long been relegated to the realms of superstition. But in Scandinavia, to this very day, the bringer of gifts at Christmas is a tiny Yule goblin, the chief of the little people. With his little pointed cap, dressed all in red, he comes every year, and children leave out porridge to keep him in good humor. And in North America, everybody knows that the little people are alive and well and living in the North Pole. There, they are happily employed in Santa's workshop, making toys for the children of the world. By the 3rd century, the church fathers threw up their hands in despair of ever completely eliminating the celebration of Saturnalia. It was far too popular. Instead, they decided to adopt most of the pagan traditions, baptize them with Christian meaning, and reorient the entire festival toward the Christian sun of righteousness. The date of Christ's birthday was chosen to compete with the pagan celebrations of December 25th, sacred not only to the Romans, but also to the Persian religion of Mithraism, whose followers worshipped the sun and celebrated the return of its strength on that day, and which in those days was one of Christianity's strongest rivals. Decorating houses and churches with evergreen boughs was explained by quoting the prophet Isaiah, who had predicted the day when
glory of Lebanon shall come unto you, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box tree, to beautify the place of my sanctuary.
The evergreen boughs of the Christmas wreath became symbolic of the everlasting life which Jesus Christ's birth promised to the faithful. and its circular shape was a reminder of the crown of thorns placed on his head when he was crucified. Holly now symbolized eternal life. Its bright red berries represented the drops of blood Jesus shed on the cross. Their color also represented the burning love for God, present in the hearts of the faithful. The prickly leaves remind us of his crown of thorns. Later, during the Middle Ages, the red berries of the holly were believed to keep witches away, and holly became the traditional lucky evergreen for wreath making. Only mistletoe, the pagans' most sacred symbol of fertility, was entirely banned from the church. The Christmas tree, as we know it, began in Germany in the year 718, when St. Boniface arrived from England to convert the pagans. Determined to root out all that was heathen, he cut down a sacred oak in the city of Gismar. To pacify the angry worshippers, he planted a fir tree in its place and declared this to be a symbol of their new faith. It so happened that this took place on Christmas Eve. Christianity also claimed most of the pagan fire rituals, maintaining that the lighting of candles and the burning of the Yule log symbolized the divine light believed to illuminate the world. Exchanging gifts was said to relate to the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men carried with them from the east when they came to pay homage to the newborn Christ. And the tradition of singing at Christmas, from the idea that angels sang when they appeared to the shepherds at Bethlehem to announce Christ's birth. By the 16th century, carols were sung only at Christmas time by the bishop and the clergy. And the subject of the carols related only to the Christmas story. But carols rapidly became popular amongst the general public and were soon sung on the streets and other public places. And in time, carols sang of Christmas in general, not just the birth of Christ.
Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open
In the 2nd century, the church tried to replace the lusty gods and mock kings who hosted the pagan winter festivals with a more pious figure of their own, Saint Nicholas, an attempt which ultimately failed bitterly. His uncle arranged for him to enter a monastery just as soon as he gave away all his worldly possessions. It so happened that at the same time, a neighboring family with 3 girls had fallen on hard times. Their father could no longer afford to provide them with dowries, so their chances of marriage were slim. The girls decided that the eldest would enter a brothel and support the others. When Nicholas learned of their plan, he put some gold coins in a bag and waited until the wee hours of the morning and went out into the street. The next morning, one of the girls found the little bag of gold. Some say it was lying in her shoe, others in her stocking. And the next night, the same thing happened. On the 3rd night, the girl's father waited up and caught Nicholas in the act of dropping the 3rd bag through the window. Nicholas begged him not to reveal his identity, but the grateful father must have told someone, for the story survives, and in time became the universal tradition of hanging up a stocking or putting out a shoe to be miraculously filled with gifts during the night. Eventually, Nicholas became a bishop and was called to attend the first general council of the Christian church. That summer, there had been a terrible drought and famine was everywhere. Nicholas arrived at a small village hoping to find shelter, but not expecting any food. The innkeeper was so overwhelmed by the honor of receiving such a guest, he offered Nicholas a pot roast for supper. At first, Nicholas was delighted, but considering the state of famine, he became suspicious and went into the kitchen. There, he found the innkeeper preparing to chop up 3 little boys who had been killed and pickled in brine. Horrified, Nicholas fell to his knees and prayed fervently. Before the astonished gaze of the innkeeper, the 3 little boys came back to life. Nicholas founded an orphanage to care for them, and became known as the patron saint of children. And his fame as a miracle worker continued to grow and spread throughout the Christian world long after he died. In the 1440s, the Spanish took possession of Holland, and the legend of St. Nicholas was introduced to the Dutch. St. Nicholas became known as Santa Claus. Like Odin before him, Santa Claus spends most of his time in a distant land, though now it is Spain rather than Valhalla, compiling all the deeds, good and bad, of Dutch children in a big leather book. And every year, he loads toys and presents on a ship and sets sail for the Netherlands. The children place a wooden clog by the fire to be filled with a present or sweets, and just as they had done for Odin, leave hay and carrots for his white horse. By the 17th century, Catholic missionaries reached Siberia and introduced St. Nicholas to the reindeer people, the tribes of nomadic herdsmen living north of the Arctic Circle. In winter, they lived in timber huts. A hole to let out the smoke served as a chimney. When the huts became buried in snow, the only way in and out was by a ladder through the smoke hole. Like the Norse, in the mythology of the reindeer people, the world was represented as a tree. Its roots were in the land of the dead, its top reached the home of the guardian spirits, and the central pole symbolized the world. A shaman, part priest and part medicine man, communicated between the world of men and the world of spirits. In midwinter, when the ceremony of annual renewal took place, the shaman climbed the pole on a symbolic journey to the other worlds, finally disappearing through the smoke hole. A supernatural reindeer acted as his bodyguard. To induce the necessary state of mind, the shaman took hallucinogenic plants and magic mushrooms. Fly agaric, like belladonna used by witches in medieval times, was particularly good because it created a sense of weightlessness, of floating in space. For a while, in the Arctic, St. Nicholas became a super shaman, the spiritual mediator between the people and their new Christian god, who came and went through the chimney. The other saint responsible for inventing Christmas tradition was St. Francis of Assisi. In a cave outside the Italian town of Criccio in the year 1224, he created the first nativity scene. A friend supplied a manger, straw, and live animals. People came from far and wide to see it, while Francis stood in front of the manger delivering sermons. His idea caught on, and today, nativity scenes are popular throughout the Christian world. By the Middle Ages, Christmas in England was a crazy mixture of Christian, Roman, Norse, and Celtic custom. Alongside St. Nicholas was Old Father Christmas, who wore a wreath of holly above his large bearded figure and looked like a cross between Bacchus and a Druid priest. Like Santa Claus, he inherited Odin's long white beard and traditionally traveled on a white donkey or even a horned goat. Old Father Christmas also led the Mummers, a troupe of traveling actors who wandered from tavern to tavern and village to village. Their plays incorporated many elements of pagan ritual, and the main theme was always death and rebirth. Father Christmas is often shown holding a large bowl called a wassail bowl. The word comes from the Anglo-Saxon was hael, be thou hail, and expressed a wish for good health. This festive toast was traditionally offered with a concoction of hot ale, roasted apples, sugar, and spices. The beautifully decorated wassail bowl was taken from house to house and passed around so that everyone in the household could share in the spirit of fellowship. After each sip, those partaking in the toast were expected to top up the bowl, and great care was taken to make sure the wassail bowl remained full throughout the entire festive season so that